Welcome to the Humane Mind. Now the topic for today's video, I feel shouldn't be that controversial, but as I've seen over the past few months, people tend to get very heated about this particular topic. In fact, I've seen more backlash over this particular topic than there seems to be over things like white nationalism or white supremacy or even the subject of Islam or of transgenderism. But this particular topic isn't on something as touchy as racism, sexism, or even transgenderism. It's on a diet? Of course, I'm talking about the vegan diet. And I want to specify right at the start that there are two different types of vegans. Those who just practice the diet and trying to reduce their animal product consumption and things along those lines, and those who take it to a religious zealot extreme level.
How many vegans do you know? You know, they're clueless religious, because what they have is ritual without philosophy, fundamentally. So what's happened in many cases is that as the sophisticated religions, so to speak, have collapsed, what emerges from their ashes are rituals. And rituals are sort of the ground out of which a religion emerges. Vegans, vegetarians, environmentalists, anybody who's an ideologue, you know, and the reason that I would consider those in the religious domain is because they're systems of value, and they're predicated on fundamental assumptions that you have to take on faith.
I will be addressing certain things about the vegan diet overall as part of my case, but that doesn't mean that the diet is not a good diet or is not a healthy diet. I won't be addressing the diet in particular, although I will be touching on areas of that particular diet that people need to be more aware of, that most people who advocate the vegan lifestyle haven't considered. But I want to primarily focus on those who take this diet to the religious extreme levels, because those are people that I have a huge amount of contention with. I'm going to call those capital V vegans because they treat their diet like it is a religion. Now, I'm sure there will be both lowercase and capitalized vegans that will find places to object to things I say in my video, and their objection will probably be something along the lines of, I'm uninformed or ignorant on the actual diet itself or on health benefits altogether. So I want to lay a groundwork for what my experience and my background concerning health includes. I'm an 8-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and every 6 months in the Air Force, you take a physical fitness test. In all but 2 of those tests, I scored an excellent. The 2 that I did not score an excellent on, I had an 89 point something, so I barely was under. I was also a physical training leader for my squadron. That means that not only was I in really good condition, I was in charge of the PT sessions. We did PT Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and so I know a lot about keeping in shape. I was in very good physical condition according to the Air Force's fitness standards, but every time I went to see my doctor for my annual checkups, the nurses would always ask me if I've ever been diagnosed with high blood pressure, because my blood pressure, when they tested me, it wasn't in the dangerous area, but it was borderline, and it's happened consistently every time I went into the doctor's office. It even got to the point where my doctor recommended that I take some prescription medication to lower my blood pressure. Now, while I was on this particular medication, it gave me extreme migraines, incredible dry mouth. I was having all kinds of other problems, so I stopped this particular prescription, and my doctor was pretty upset when I told her this because I had not consulted her prior to stopping my prescription. What I did instead is I got my own blood pressure monitor kit, and I would test my own blood pressure every morning and every evening, and it wasn't a particular set time every morning or a particular set every time in the evening, so that way it would be a little more randomized, so that way I could get a better analysis of my actual blood pressure. And for the most part, it would stay fairly high, but never cross over into the dangerous part of high blood pressure. In my last year in the Air Force, 2013, my brother started looking into a particular health and wellness company, and he was asking about, what I thought of it, and so I started looking into this particular company, and I found that they had a very good track record. They had a very high reputation. Their products were being used by professional athletes such as those in the Olympics and a lot of professional sports figures that I don't follow sports very much, but I had at least heard of all of these names that were endorsing their products and were taking their products. I figured, what harm could it do? And I started taking the products myself. Within weeks, while I was taking these products, I noticed that my blood pressure had dropped into a normal, healthy range as opposed to being borderline on the verge of dangerous. That was an unexpected benefit. I had not even considered that. After personally seeing the health benefits of improved nutrition, I decided that when my Air Force career was over, that I would actually work for this company and try to help other people to see the benefits of a healthier diet. So I spent the next 2 years attending seminars from active physicians, dietitians, and nutritionists. I read every book, article, and journal I could get my hands on. Unfortunately, I found out that my understanding of nutrition and the information that I was finding was not really of use to most Americans. The average American is content to sit on their butt, eating fast food, eating foods that are saturated with high fructose corn syrup, eating excessive amounts of dairy, and eating empty calories. I still advocate for this particular company and use their products. Nutrition is still a huge part of my life, but when it comes to trying to convince other people that their diets are killing them or at best are incomplete, I would rather trade places with Sisyphus. I don't have a background or degree in nutrition. I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a dietitian, but I have done enough research to know that the nutritional labels on foods are outdated. Of course, I'm speaking mostly of the U.S. nutritional labels. I'm not sure exactly how it works for other countries. This is in the U.S. specifically. The nutritional labels on your food that are used today, the nutritional labels that are still used today are based off of data from 1968. Those are based off of the highest recommended daily allowances at that time. The U.S. currently has something called the Dietary Reference Index that has been updated based on new nutritional information, and in most cases, the new recommended values are much higher than the older values. Unfortunately, the nutritional facts labels have not been updated with these new values. Now, if you think about what makes up the recommended daily values, those are the minimum values to maintain your current health. Those are to prevent things like rickets, to prevent things like scurvy, prevent diseases and conditions that occur when you are malnourished. What they don't take into consideration, your sex, because biological sexes need different nutritional values, and they don't consider things like your lifestyle. Those are just for the average people to prevent conditions. They also are not intended for optimal health. The daily recommended values are for your minimum health, which if you are a health advocate, you should never be using those. Those are not the values that you need in order to become healthier, in order to become more fit, in order to become the best version of yourself. And that's what we should be advising, is how people can become the best physical and healthy version of themselves, not just to maintain what they are. Right now, the recommended daily allowance, or the daily values on your nutritional facts, are focused on the surviving aspect, not the thriving aspect. And that's what I want to promote, is that people thrive based on their nutrition and based on their diet. Alright, so that is my background. So I'm not coming from a place of complete ignorance on this topic. I have done a lot of research while I was looking into all of this nutrition for my own personal benefit. I also discovered other things like the difference between LDL and HDL, which I will get into later in the video, because that is going to be one of my arguments against those capital V vegans, and how they misuse both of those and how they misconstrue the facts based on that. I'm going to be focusing on two individuals in particular because they tend to make these same arguments repeatedly, and these arguments are parroted by their followers or by other people within this capital V vegan community. These capital V vegans will say things like killing animals is immoral, and when asked to prove that it is immoral or why it is immoral or questioned about it or anything like that, they usually bring up four particular arguments. Now, there may be more than these four, but these are the four that I noticed, and these are the four that I will be addressing. So the arguments they present usually fall along these lines.
Me killing you would be a personal decision. That's it, and it could give me pleasure doing it. Maybe I'm a psycho, but that doesn't mean it's morally justified.
Number two.
Yes, you need to prove why meat is immoral.
Well, your premise is interesting because basically you're making an appeal to social contract. We already do it, and we... like generally in society, we wouldn't consider somebody immoral if they're eating meat. This is just an appeal to social contract. You're not breaking any social contracts with anyone by eating meat, so therefore it's ethical. Well, if you're going to appeal to social contract, then you could use that same thing to justify slavery. If we lived in a society... Wow,
you brought up slavery quick, man. Are we like 2 minutes in?
Well, it's a completely valid argument. Like, if you're going to appeal to social contract...
not. Slavery is not equal to eating meat.
That's besides the point. It's not...
You compared it to eating meat, then it's
I didn't compare it to eating meat. I'm just using it to demonstrate how you're being logically inconsistent.
Number three.
An action which causes suffering, which isn't necessary, is in one context justified, and in another context, you'd reject it. That is inconsistent.
Number 4.
What it is about animals, which, if true of humans, would make it okay to murder them needlessly for food. So is it that they're less intelligent? Well, if humans were less intelligent, would it be okay to kill them needlessly for food? I don't think so. Is it that they don't have a future concept? Well, assuming that's even true, if humans didn't have a future concept, would it be okay to murder them needlessly for food? So unless you can actually ethically differentiate humans and animals in a way that would make the treatment justified for either, if either of them possess the difference, then you're proposing a double standard.
All of these arguments are very similar to each other, and all of them fail to do what they are supposed to do, which is prove that it is immoral to kill animals. The first one is pretty silly, and most people should be able to see right through it. They take something that is objectively immoral, like murder and rape, and they say, well, because those things are immoral, therefore eating animals is also immoral. I mean, that's not exactly what they said, but that is the line of reasoning that they're using. They flip it the other way to hopefully confuse you and get you to not think about what they're actually trying to prove here. This particular argument is circular reasoning, in that if it's immoral to kill humans, then it's also immoral to kill animals. And if you try to say that killing animals has nothing to do with morality, then killing humans has nothing to do with morality. What they fail to realize is that this argument can be used for anything. For example, it is immoral to sit on a stool when there is a perfectly good beanbag. No, that's not immoral. That's a personal preference. Fine, then it is a personal preference for me to rape your mother. No, that would be an immoral act. You can't have it both ways. Either it is immoral to sit on a stool, or nothing is immoral. In order for this line of reasoning to make any sense, humans and animals have to be the same when it comes to morality. I shouldn't have to lay the groundwork that humans have the right to life, as that should be an axiom. But I encountered a certain penguin in a previous debate who basically argued that. It didn't occur to me at the time, but it occurs to me now that anyone who argues against the human right to life should have no objection to someone ending their life. If they do object to that, then they are a hypocrite or a complete idiot. We have come to understand that the right to human life has to be an axiom. It has to be the foundation for all other things, because if I don't have the right to life, my opinion does not matter. What I say and do does not matter, because someone could just kill me and prevent me from continuing to say and do those things. If we don't have that axiom, it's whoever kills the most people must be right. In order to have any kind of debate, in order to have any kind of theoretical or ideological constructive discourse, we must have the right to life as a foundation, and also the right to speak our minds, so that way we can actually have a discourse and present different ideas to each other. Without those two things, there's no point in arguing with somebody. There's no point in debating with someone. They must adhere to both of those axioms. So extrapolating from that, if I have the right to life, the person I'm arguing against has the right to life, everyone else I encounter who would argue this situation could come to the determination that they also have the right to life. And this occurs amongst humans. And so all humans have the right to life. And this would even go down to those who cannot argue that they have the right to life, because we are all human. Therefore, this is an axiom that applies to the human race. No such axiom exists for animals. The second argument is actually a valid argument, and I've used it myself on several occasions, because what it does is it points out that morality does become more refined over time. Things that used to be considered perfectly moral are now considered immoral. In this particular case, we go to slavery. Slavery used to be considered a moral practice, but as our understanding of morality improved as a whole, we deemed it to be immoral, and we also can look back at the past and condemn it based on what we now know as the more moral position. I have often stated that morality as a whole has never changed, and that the objective moral standard has been the same. Our understanding of that moral standard has changed. So from the beginning of time, slavery has been an immoral practice, but we didn't know it at the time, and we know it now. Morality is a universal constant, and we are constantly trying to improve our knowledge of it. This is similar to our understanding of what the atom is. The atom used to be understood as the smallest particle of the universe. They used to refer to it by, the plum pudding model and things along those lines. So we knew it was there, but we didn't know exactly what it entailed. And as our understanding of the atom increased, we now understand that the atom is made up of subparticles, and those subparticles have subparticles. Our concept of an atom is still pretty much intact, although it has been more refined, and we've cut out the things that actually don't apply to that. Same thing would apply to morality. We had a broad understanding of what was moral, and as time goes on, we cut out things that we've determined do not fall within the realm of morality. So yes, that is a case. However, this does not prove or disprove whether it is immoral to kill animals, so that's still the point of contention that people have with vegans. When it comes to slavery, abolitionists proved that it was an immoral practice because they started with the foundation that humans have the right to life. From there, we know that humans have the right of self-ownership. This is sometimes called the pursuit of happiness. So if humans have the right to life and the right to pursue their own happiness, it is immoral to imprison or hold a human against their will. All abolitionists needed to prove from there was that all races were equally human, and thus this axiom applied to all humans across the board, which is what they did. Now, Benjamin Franklin said something along the lines of, "I used to think they were no better than animals until I was shown that they could be taught to read." So in the case of slavery, people were under the impression that these were lower life forms and they were not equally human. And once that was established that they were equally human, then it became an immoral practice to continue slavery. For vegans to do the same with animals, they would need to prove that animals are on par with humans when it comes to the right of life and self-ownership. This will be a very hard argument for vegans to actually prove, as most of them have said that humans and animals are not equal in these regards. The other thing that they fail to consider is that if it's immoral to kill an animal, animals would also be subject to the same standard. If animals have the right to life, and killing an animal would be a moral violation, thus any animal that killed another animal, like a cat killing a bird or a lion killing a zebra, and so on and so forth, those acts would be in and of themselves immoral because they've established that animals have the right to life. My contention with the vegans' claim that it's immoral to kill animals is that animals are not moral actors themselves. For every other aspect of what is and is not moral, it is concerned with human behavior because humans have shown that they can behave morally. I would argue that animals are not subject to being protected by morality because they cannot uphold that morality. This is the same justification behind why we can imprison or execute people who have killed other humans, because they have demonstrated that they cannot behave in a moral manner. They cannot respect other people's right to life, therefore we do not respect their right to life. If animals cannot respect the right to life of other animals, they should be subject to that same behavior, but vegans will often say, oh no, they're animals, they are exempt. So it's holding us to a higher standard than we would hold to them. Morality is the same standard for everyone or everything that morality should apply to. There is no one that should be above morality, where it applies to everyone underneath them, but not to them, in which case vegans would be putting animals above humans in this respect, in that humans would be subject to the rules of morality when it comes to animals, but animals would not be subject to the rules of morality when it concerns each other or to humans. Morality, therefore, should only be used to protect moral actors. Otherwise, morality would be used to protect rapists, murderers, and thieves at the expense of their victims. The third argument is actually vegans' best argument. I say it's their best argument because it's their most effective. People will respond to feels. While it is natural to empathize with animals and want to prevent their suffering, this is not a moral position. Giving into this emotional appeal will lead to situations like someone saving an animal over a human life.
As Peter Singer writes in Animal Liberation, avoiding speciesism does not mean we must hold that it is as wrong to kill a dog as it is to kill a human being in full possession of his or her faculties. The only position that is irredeemably speciesist is the one that tries to make the boundary of the right to life run exactly parallel to the boundary of our own species. Anti-speciesism is simply recognizing that species is irrelevant with regard to moral concern, just like race is irrelevant, gender is irrelevant, etc. There may be reasons to choose the human over the dog, and 9 times out of 10, this is the rational choice, but that choice has nothing to do with species. There are many areas in which the superior mental powers of normal adult humans make a difference. Anticipation, more detailed memory, greater knowledge of what is happening, and so on. These differences explain why a human dying from cancer is likely to suffer more than a mouse. It is the mental anguish which makes the human's position so much harder to bear. I accept the normative view that there is greater significance in killing a being who has plans for the future, who wishes to accomplish things, than there is in killing a being who is incapable of thinking about the future at all, but exists either moment to moment or within a very short time horizon. For example, a time horizon limited to thinking about eating something in the near future. It is, other things being equal, much less a tragedy to kill that sort of being than to kill someone who wants to live long enough to do the sorts of things that humans typically want to achieve over the course of their lives. This is a graduated view of moral status, as Singer puts it, that's based on cognitive ability and therefore degree of suffering. So, with the burning building scenario, it's rational to choose the human over the dog, since the typical human is more sentient than the typical dog, and therefore would likely experience more anguish. Similarly, it would be rational to choose the dog over a fish, or the fish over a beetle. However, this doesn't mean that it's always rational to choose the human over the dog, or the dog over the fish, etc. We may legitimately hold that there are some features of certain beings that make their lives more valuable than those of other beings. But there will surely be some non-human animals whose lives, by any standards, are more valuable than the lives of some humans. A chimpanzee, dog, or pig, for instance, will have a higher degree of self-awareness and a greater capacity for meaningful relationships with others than a severely retarded infant or someone in a state of advanced senility. In such a case, where the choice is between saving a human vegetable or a fully functional, sentient dog, the rational moral choice would be to save the dog. A speciesist, in this case, would never make the rational moral choice.
That is the main problem with this line of thinking. Humans are emotional. We are not completely rational or completely logical, although we like to think we are. We are extremely subject to our own emotions. I try to keep my emotions out of these things, and I try to come at things from the most objective perspective as possible, but that's impossible to do as a human. We are emotional at our core, and that's what this is an appeal to. When it comes to morality and argumentation, emotions have to be checked at the door. Arguments and appeals to rationality need to be objective across the board. They need to be something that can apply to everyone regardless of your emotional state. She's trying to talk about morality and how sometimes it's okay to save the life of a pet or a dog from a burning building over the life of a human. This does not hold up logically given the foundation that I've laid that it is an axiom that humans have the right to life and there is no such axiom for animals. Now, when the Warskis debated Vegan Gains and Ask Yourself, they brought up a very brilliant point that when it comes to the production of cars, electronics, and clothing, human suffering is involved.
Care about suffering and death so much, why don't you move, like it might not take, like it might not be a week of doing this, but you might have to spend a few years, save a bunch of money, have a small shed up north and live off the land. Why don't you just start working towards stopping the suffering?
Well, again, I don't think that would be in the interest of overall good. No, that's not what I said at all. I said it's not in the best interest of myself and just the world in general. I think I'd have a much more positive impact doing what I'm doing right here than trying to move out into the woods and like live off the land and just forego civilization.
That would be the almost ultimate thing, because in order to reduce by the vegan standard, then that is the reduction.
No.
If I cared about suffering so much, then why am I not, making an idea for implementation of non-child slaves being the ones who do that? Why don't we get people over, you know what I mean?
Well, the industry is improving.
Yeah. So, but why do we still let it happen? And that's the idea with the implementation of being a vegan and how the meat industry has been dropping over the years because more people are vegetarian and all that stuff. And that is a slow implementation. And sure, this industry of child slaves, that's dropping and that's fantastic. But again, the implementation takes a long time, and I believe that a lot of you guys have the perspective that it's easier.
And it does take longer if people refuse to do it. I got something after you, Richard.
You saw what they did there, right? When it comes to animal suffering, they want it all eliminated immediately. Gradual is not good enough for the animals. But when it comes to human suffering and, say, slave labor factories and things like that, they're okay with that being a gradual process. For someone who prides himself on pointing out when people have a double standard, ask yourself, has a lot of double standards. From my perspective, the correct moral position when it comes to suffering is to reduce suffering as much as possible. If causing suffering was in and of itself immoral, this would make physical labor jobs immoral, competitive sports immoral, certain surgeries immoral, and impregnating women immoral. Due to your moral stance, you've just eliminated the human race. There are levels of suffering that are currently acceptable given our level of technology and resources. These levels of acceptable suffering are reduced as we become more efficient with our processes, as we discover better ways of doing things. During the Industrial Revolution, workplace fatalities and injuries were fairly commonplace. And it's not because these people were immoral or barbaric. They were doing the best with what they had at the time. As we have discovered better ways of doing things, safer ways of contributing to these processes, these workplace environments have become safer over time. Now, as to why I think the reduction of suffering is the moral position, is you have to think about what morality is to begin with. Morality is what we use to determine the distinction between what is good and what is bad. So when things are moral, those are things that we should do because they are good. Either they are good for ourselves or they are good for others. Now, this particular area of morality, I think, kind of overlaps with the realm of economics. Economics is concerned with having a variety of options and choosing the option that does the most good. It either produces the most benefit or uses the least amount of resources or causes the least amount of harm. So while most people think of economics as just, penny pinching, economics actually does concern itself a lot with what is moral, because moral is based on good versus bad. And the most economic option is often the option that produces the most good while reducing the amount of harm that it's caused in the process. So when it comes to my perspective on suffering when it comes to animals, I would say that this is more towards for the benefit of humans than of the animals themselves. This is because we have compassion for the animals. We feel empathy for their suffering. And in order to reduce our own suffering, we have this moral obligation to protect these animals because that causes the most good for us. So this is an area where the vegans do have it correct. Although the vegan community takes this to the extreme in that if you cause any animal suffering at the moment, that you are being immoral. The correct position is that we are causing suffering, but that's the current level of acceptable suffering, and we should be constantly moving that back to reduce suffering till it's all but eliminated. So this should be the case for industries across the board, for all animals, for all humans. That is the correct moral position, at least from my perspective, is that we should be reducing where we can suffering in all aspects. Now, the fourth argument, I see something that is easily debunked, and yet these capital V vegans will either sidestep the issue or misconstrue the concept overall in order to maintain this particular argument because they think it's a strong argument when it's not. So this particular argument, I would say vegans have already agreed to, although they refuse to accept it, because in the debate that Roaming Millennial had with Vegan Gains and Ask Yourself, Ranting Monkey asked them,
do you consider it murder if if two animals kill each other?
No, because an animal doesn't have the same capacity for thought as a human. There's a
they don't have moral agency.
How is that right there not a trait that is distinguishing humans from animals enough that the same morality would not apply to both? If animals are incapable of moral agency, that trait alone should invalidate the very argument they are laying out. And yet for some reason they refuse to accept this as a valid trait that humans have that animals do not. Another thing that I noticed about these vegans is when they're talking about animals, they tend to lump all animals together in one big homogeneous group. But when it comes to humans, they refer to humans as just that one species. But animals includes a bunch of different species. And then they compare the group of all animals to the group of humans as that one particular species. And they act like that is an equal comparison, as if those two things are similar to each other. They will isolate individual humans when it suits their purposes and compare them not just to an entire species, but to the entire animal population as a whole. However, when their opposition tries to isolate a specific animal or a specific species like Roaming did with the oysters, they completely dismiss that point of view.
Either Richard or ask yourself, why is it okay to eat plants but not animals?
Because plants aren't sentient and they cannot feel suffering and pain.
There are actually some animals, like oysters and mussels, for instance, that are not sentient in any way, shape, or form. They're essentially biological automatons that react to stimuli.
Yeah, I just want to say, look, we can talk about insects and oysters and all of the questionable cases and gray areas, but we need to be on the same page with the basics. I mean, let's just talk about cows. Is it okay to stab a cow to death?
Well, actually, I'm trying to make the argument that it is okay to stab a cow to death if you plan on eating it.
Okay, so that's not a position. If you wouldn't accept stabbing a human to death, and you can't ethically differentiate a cow from a human in a way.
But wait, I'm on the way. I'm on the way to differentiating. That's why I started with oysters.
I think Roaming should make the case about cows.
And I plan
you're
on
talking about oysters.
Well, let's move to oysters afterwards. Let's talk about. Yeah, let's get on cows or pigs or something like that.
But I'm establishing an ideology. I'm establishing a framework for this argument. And just to clarify, vegans don't have issues with, let's say, lions eating a zebra because it's part of the natural order. Is that correct?
Well, they don't have moral agency and they need to do it to survive. You do not need meat to survive. You're making a false analogy here.
And let's just be clear. We do recognize that suffering. If we had some kind of God wand and you could wave a wand and make nature not harm itself, then, I mean, sure, we would obviously want to eliminate that suffering. But currently there's just no tangible way to do that. With humans killing animals needlessly, it's like, yeah, we can just not eat their corpses. Problem solved.
I'm trying to explain my reasoning.
You're doing a poor job of it, but whatever.
Wait. Let's not get too hostile. Let's just zero in here. You can finish what you're saying, but my question, to be specific, what is the difference between a human and a cow, which, if true of a human instead of a cow, would make it okay to stab a human to death needlessly for food?
It sounds like she's answering it, so go, Roaming.
Yeah, so when we look at
one word, it should be one word. There should be a specific difference.
Why should it one word?
You can't dictate what her. You can't dictate what her answer will be, though.
You guys don't see any difference between cows and humans.
We do see a difference. The point is, what is the difference?
If you guys can acknowledge that there is a difference, what are you arguing about? If you acknowledge there's a difference between cows and humans, why are you sitting here begging us to tell you the difference between cows and humans?
Again, that's just your lack of nuance. You're not comprehending the point. If you want to say that it is ethically justified to stab a cow to death for food, but it's not ethically justified to stab a human to death for food, you can't just say, oh, they're different. I could say, okay, well, black people are different. You need to spell out a specific difference, which, if true of humans, would make it okay to do this to humans. Otherwise, it's a double standard.
What do you see as the difference between cows and humans?
I don't
think you're smart enough.
There's
what's the difference? That's what you're asking us.
I'm asking you. I'm trying to talk to you right now. You're asking what is the difference between a cow and a human. There's plenty of difference. One has spots, one's on 4 legs, it's a ruminant, it has a tail, the other reads books. We can talk about a ton of differences. We're looking for a difference which, if true of humans, would make it okay to treat the human in the way that you're proposing treating the cow.
According to Ask Yourself, when discussing intelligence, it is okay to talk about specific individuals of the human race and compare that to the entire collective intelligence of another species. I think it's funny that he doesn't mention specifics when it comes to animals, like for instance the piano-playing chicken Jokgu, because he knows that things like that would be an exception, and yet for some reason he doesn't make that same exception for the mentally retarded humans that he uses in his examples. Those were my critiques of the moral arguments. Now, another reason that vegans like to talk about their particular diet is they often cite that you don't need to eat meat.
Human beings have absolutely no nutritional needs to eat meat. We do perfectly fine on a whole foods vegan diet. In fact, most of the research suggests we do better. The diet we've evolved to eat is a herbivorous diet. And because of that, because we live in modern Western society and we have the luxury of modern agriculture, it's completely unnecessary and therefore unethical to raise and kill animals for food.
Need is very subjective. You plant eaters make me thick. Why would you eat a plant, a living being, when you can get all of the nutrition you need straight from the ground? Like, I found this lump of clay, and it has all the nutrients I need to survive. I've been living off of this stuff for weeks. Tastes a little salty, and you can taste kind of copper and a little bit of zinc in it. But, you know, once you get used to that, it's still pretty good. It's super delicious. And it's not bad once you get used to it. Once you get used to the kind of mud flavor. But, you know, it's a sacrifice that you have to make so that way you aren't ending a life. You monster. Another thing that I started doing that is way better than you stupid vegans is I started recycling my own urine because it's better for the environment overall. Also, it's sterile, and I like the taste. Nope, it pretty much tastes like this. And there is no limit to need, because there are a lot of things that we do because we want to, or because they help progress us. Need often refers to the minimum amount. So when vegans make this argument, they're talking about the minimum amount you need to survive. So this goes back to what I was saying about the recommended daily allowances and the dietary reference index, which those are the minimums that you would need to survive in order to continue to exist. And this is something these capital V vegans seem to be emphasizing. The problem with focusing on the minimums is you are not exceeding, you are not progressing, you are not growing. When it comes to living, you are either dying, surviving, or thriving. Vegans are arguing for humans to just survive. I am saying the correct position is for humans to thrive. We want the human race to thrive as much as possible. We want us to become healthier. I want humans to become better individuals, better in physical body, better in mentality, better as an overall person. So from my perspective, I'm going to be talking about the food chain. So the way the food chain works is there are nutrients in the soil, and those nutrients get absorbed through the root systems up into plants. And herbivores eat those plants, and those nutrients then become part of those herbivores. Carnivores come along, and they eat those herbivores, and then those nutrients become part of those carnivores. Hopefully this is not new information, but I want to emphasize that these nutrients, they are in the soil. They are just being concentrated throughout the process of the food chain. In some cases, they make more complex versions of these nutrients in some way or form. So if vegans are actually concerned with the minimum amount we need to do, what they should be advocating is for a system where we are harvesting nutrients from the soil and condensing them into a more compact version that we can then consume. Having such a process would eliminate the need for harvesting and for livestock. And yet vegans don't advocate for this. They instead advocate for the consumption of plants. So when talking about the food chain, there's two things to notice. Herbivores eat constantly. Herbivores eat a lot of plants. Carnivores, on the other hand, tend to only eat 1 to 2 meals a day. And while they do spend a lot of time hunting for their prey, once they have their prey and they consume their meal, they can relax and do other things. There's a theory that's been going around for a while, R-selected versus K-selected, and it talks about various personalities amongst people, and it compares them to different types of creatures. The R personality types are compared to rabbits, while the K personality types are compared to foxes or wolves. R's types, they tend to have a lot of children, and they tend to devote very little time to each specific child. Their mentality is just have as many kids as possible. Some of them are bound to survive and succeed. So they spend a lot of time using resources and producing a lot of children. And if you look at rabbits, this is what they do. They spend all of their time eating and having sex and producing litter. And if one of their children die, there's very little emotional attachment to it. They spend very little investment in the future generations. They're more concerned with eating and then producing more offspring. So rabbits tend to have lots of children per year and repeatedly have large litters. Whereas if you compare that to the carnivores like the foxes and wolves will have a very small litter and usually will only have about 2 to 3 children in their entire lifetime. And carnivores tend to devote a lot of attention and resources into their children because they have less of them and they are more concerned with their children's survival. Now you may be asking, what does that particular theory and what do those observations contradictions have to do with veganism? Well, if you look at what vegans' lifestyles are all about, those who advocate the vegan lifestyle, that tends to be the only thing they concern themselves with. They are always obsessing about their food. They're eating constantly throughout the day in order to keep up their levels of nutrition. That is a lot of time to devote just to food and not to anything else. They fall definitely towards the R-selected variety. Whereas if you look at people who are not advocating the vegan diet, who are not pro, capital V vegans, they usually eat 2 meals a day, either a large breakfast and a large dinner, or a large lunch and a large dinner. And this is because those 2 meals provide enough nutrition for them to subsist on throughout the day, and they have time to devote to other things. There's one thing I've noticed, and I'm surprised that no one else has pointed this out. When you look at the vegan community, those who are super advocates for the vegan lifestyle, look at their professions.
What is your profession?
If you think about it, there are health and wellness coaches, physical fitness instructors, professional athletes, celebrities, and models. There are very few pro-vegan lifestyle advocates who don't fall within those categories. It is part of their job to work on their physical appearance and to stay on a consistent diet. If you look at a bunch of other professions like professors, CEOs, people who spend a huge amount of their work week devoted to what their profession entails, they don't have the same kind of time sink into their diet and exercise habits that a lot of these capital V vegan can achieve. They continually act like, oh, it's not that much time, it's not that much effort, and yet their entire life tends to revolve solely around their diet. They have built their life around their diet, where someone in another profession is not able to build their entire life around what they are consuming and how they are incorporating that into their body. Prior to the agricultural revolution, human lives at the time were very subsistence-based, in that they were lucky if they had enough food to survive and to keep going. There tended to be very little downtime in between trying to get food or worrying about the next meal. Thanks to revolutions in the agriculture industry overall, our advancements in irrigation, our advancements in crop harvesting, our invention of tools to make those jobs easier, all of those things advanced humankind in that it took us from a subsistence living to the point where we didn't have to devote as much time and energy into our food, and we were able to focus on other things that improved human life. It was the agricultural revolution that laid the foundation for our industrial revolution, where we saw massive increases in human production and capability. And the industrial revolution would never have been possible if humans were still on a subsistence living lifestyle. My case is that vegans are advocating for a subsistence living lifestyle, whereas people who are not vegan are advocating for the thriving lifestyle, in the case where we have more time and energy to devote for things other than our diet. I don't want to be misconstrued here. I'm not advocating against a vegan lifestyle. I'm saying make sure that you're considering that total cost-benefit analysis before you continue to devote your life entirely to that particular diet. Now, I know for some people there is the emotional reason why they have that particular diet, because they can't accept the thought of eating a living being, anything with a face, and they feel compassion for the animal. I am completely on board with that.
I don't eat meat because I would cry for a week. The whole reason why I even turned vegan is because I saw some documentaries and I just don't like how they treat animals, and I'm crazy like that, so I'll be like, I'll just eat plants. Now, here are the issues with this vegan community. What has this turned into makes me want to puke. This is how you usually puke if you don't. I was a vegetarian for 14 years before I was vegan. I didn't really, advertise that because it is an eating habit. It's like calling yourself a proud licker of lollipops. That was not the best example. It's an eating habit. Yes, it is nice, but it doesn't make you special.
You'll pay for your crimes against humanity!
Didn't you know? Todd's vegan.
Vegan? It's not really that big of a deal.
No kidding. Anyone can be vegan.
Ovo-lacto-vegetarian, maybe.
Ovo what?
I partake not in the meat, nor the breast milk, nor the ovum of any creature with a face.
Short answer, being vegan just makes you better than most people.
Bingo.
Hey man, question? I always wondered, how does not eating dairy products give you psychic powers?
Okay. You know how you only use 10% of your brain? That's because the other 90% is filled with curds in the way.
Did you learn that at Vegan Academy?
Go ahead and get snippy, baby. If you knew the science, maybe I'd listen to what you say.
I understand that there are health benefits to the vegan lifestyle. It is way more sustainable than other these fad diets like Atkins and things like that are going around. So if you're going to be on a diet, I would prefer you to be on a vegan or a vegetarian diet, or maybe even a paleo diet as opposed to some of these other diets. There are nutritional benefits. In fact, I was on a vegan diet myself for about 6 months, and I was maintaining that diet pretty consistently until I saw the behavior of these capital V vegans, in which I decided I want no part of that community. I don't want to be associated with that particular group, and so I went back to my regular diet. So the last point I want to get across in this video is when it comes to nutrition of the vegan diet. I said there are nutritional aspects of it. There are health benefits to that particular diet. But I did want to clear up some confusion that these capital V vegans are spreading out there. VeganGains is notorious for doing this sort of thing because I've seen him comment on the difference between LDL and HDL, and yet after the fact he will use cholesterol as an overall bad term.
Cholesterol is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. This is the level where atherosclerosis cannot occur. And if you don't know, atherosclerosis just means clogging of your arteries. At 75 milligrams per deciliter or over, this is where atherosclerosis starts to progress. This relationship is linear, so the higher your cholesterol score, the faster atherosclerosis progresses. When you consume dietary saturated fat and cholesterol, your cholesterol score goes up. And this also is a hyperbolic curve. So what happens is, if you eat a very small amount of saturated fat and cholesterol, that will have a dramatic impact on raising your serum cholesterol score. If your serum cholesterol is already high, adding more dietary cholesterol and saturated fat won't do much.
Not every meat product is high in cholesterol.
Any food that contains cholesterol is bad for you. Cholesterol is bad for you. Saturated fat and cholesterol significantly raises your LDL bad cholesterol, and it only causes a minor increase in your HDL good cholesterol. The overall net effect is harmful.
I'm going to try to break this down for you. HDL is the good cholesterol, and LDL is the bad cholesterol. These stand for high density and low density lipoprotein, respectively. LDL is improperly formed cholesterol. It is either damaged or it has an insufficient coating. And what this causes the LDL to do is to stick to the inside of your circulatory system. Whereas HDL will pass through just fine. It can bump up against the walls of your arteries and veins and not stick. But LDL, because it is improperly formed, has a tendency to get stuck. This is like oil in an engine, and after oil is used and processed so many times, it tends to thicken and it tends to break down, and it's not as lubricating as it used to be, and it'll end up sticking on the inside of your engine. It'll end up sticking to various metal along the system, and the best way to do this is to flush it out with new oil. This is why you do an oil change in your cars. You've got that built up either lubricant that is hardening and is losing some of its lubrication properties, or that lubricant is just breaking down over time and use. So the best way to do this is to flush your system and start pumping new oil through that. That is what HDL acts at. HDL, because it is properly formed, flows through your veins more easily, and it actually has the tendency of dislodging the LDL that is stuck to the inside of your arteries and veins. So a high amount of HDL is actually good for you, because the more HDL you have in your system, the less likely you are to have plaque buildup. It is your ratio that is the problem. If your LDL is too high, the HDL cannot properly flush it from your system. So your goal is to have a high HDL content in your bloodstream and a low LDL content. Whereas these vegans misconstrue it and just say, oh, you've got an overall high cholesterol score, that's bad, you're going to die of a heart attack. The other things that they don't consider is that your body naturally produces cholesterol. About 75% of the cholesterol currently flowing through your body, it was produced by your body. There's only 25% that is contributed to consumption or your dietary habits. Your body has systems to properly regulate how how much cholesterol is flowing through it. So if you consume a lot more cholesterol, it will reduce the amount that it produces to match that. The other thing is that cholesterol doesn't always break down in your digestive system. When you consume cholesterol, it does not go immediately to your bloodstream. In fact, the only thing that we know of that does have that kind of property is alcohol. When alcohol is in your stomach, it tends to absorb through the lines and end up in your bloodstream relatively quickly. Everything else needs to be broken down inside your digestive tract before it is transported into your bloodstream itself. This applies to all nutrients, including cholesterol. And if your body doesn't end up breaking down that cholesterol, well, then it just passes through your system. It's time to bring up absorption, because this is something I've had a debate with people on Twitter. Now, your body has a limit to the amount of nutrients that it can absorb at any given time. This is why your body prioritizes nutrients or vitamins that you are lacking. So if you're lacking in vitamin C, when your body discovers something that you ate that has vitamin C in it, it will try to break that down as fast as possible, and it would absorb more of that into your digestive tract, so that way it can get those to the areas of your body that need that vitamin C desperately. Again, that's because there is a limit to the amount. Now, how does this relate to the vegan diet versus a diet that consists of eating meat? Well, when you compare plants to meat, plants have something called fiber. Fiber are the materials that your body cannot break down or has a difficult time breaking down. There's often nutrients contained within the fibers of a plant that your body cannot get to, or at least will not get to, because it's too much time and effort. So there are other things that are more vital for your body to absorb, and it will focus on the more immediate needs rather than spending all this time and effort breaking down this fiber in order to get the very little nutritional value from it. The nutritional value of particular fruits and vegetables is based on the average of that particular fruit or vegetable. So some of those plants are on the higher end of that spectrum, some of them are on the lower spectrum. You're talking about the average, which means about 50% are under that and 50% are over that. So when you're eating something that is high in protein, like a nut, and you ingest it, you might be getting one of those nuts that is on the lower end of that nutritional value spectrum. Additionally, your body may not break it down entirely. So the nutritional fact is the amount of those nutrients and vitamins that are in that particular item. It doesn't relate to how much your body will actually absorb. It may be the case that not only are you getting a particular item that is lower on that spectrum than you expected, but you may not be getting the full nutritional value of that as you consume it and your body doesn't break it down entirely because of that fibrous material. And this should be apparent to anyone who's ever had a painful bowel movement, and you may examine your stool afterwards and see an intact or partially digestive peanut or intact and partially digestive other plant products. But you will never find a meat product that is similarly intact. Meat tends to digest more thoroughly in your system because it does not have those fibrous properties. I just wanted to get those thoughts out there because I have not heard very many people mentioning those particular aspects or discussing those things when they're talking about the vegan diet. I just want to make sure that those who continue on the vegan diet at least have a better understanding of why it is that they're choosing their particular lifestyle and why they're doing what they're doing. While this isn't a direct quote, it should be pretty obvious what I'm actually trying to imitate here. A vegan's vainglorious vitriol shows virtually no value as they very verbosely vindicate venom towards any violators of their vapid viewpoints. Like vacant vortexes, they vacuum any value viable in their vocation by viciously vomiting, often vulgar verbiage at their victims claiming vaguely virtuous victory, vexing on the verge of violence. In short, they can be vile vipers and vermin, pronouncing verdicts of villain upon any who erode their venerable visage and reveal their veneer as vastly vacant.